What if one short answer in a voice chat changed how we looked at every Cyan word across these pages? I had been looking at these blue words, blue grids, and I started noticing that same color appearing in multiple locations. Then I asked one direct question. Are there 4 grids with blue words? Today I want to start breaking down the Cyan grids one at a time. Welcome to the first episode of the Cyan Grid Files. I quickly realized trying to cover every Cyan grid in one video gets messy fast, so this series looks at each one individually. We'll start with the question that kicked off this investigation, look at why I'm using the term cyan instead of blue, and then take a closer look at what I believe is the most straightforward grid to find, the location riddle on Trezor's Key. My goal isn't to prove a solution, it's to document the clues, explain the reasoning behind the ideas I'm exploring, and make it easier to see how the pieces might fit together. I also want to be clear from the start. I'm not saying this is solved. This is a working theory. The goal of this series is to organize the clues, test different ideas, and hopefully make it easier to see what connects and what doesn't. Back in January, I was finding more and more places that could be arranged into 8x8 grids. At that point, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply trying to figure out how many grids we should even be looking for. So eventually, I asked Chad the question directly. Are there 4 grids with blue words?
I'd say 3.
That answer immediately caught my attention. Not because it confirmed anything, but because it left room for interpretation. At the time, I believed I found 4. Today, I can point to even more places that can be arranged into 8x8 grids. So rather than answering the question, Chad's response raised a new one. That's the question this series is trying to answer. If there really are only 3, which 3 are they? At first, I was calling these blue grids, and I think most people would probably describe them that way. But the website itself uses the term cyan specifically in reference to this color. And there's something in how the game treats naming more generally. It emphasizes using things as they are, true names, not shortened versions or approximations. So I started using cyan instead of blue. Not because the meaning changes, but because I want to stay consistent with how the game itself defines things. The first grid I'm starting with was, to my knowledge, originally identified by Gnarled Oak, a member of TQBB. It's made from the cyan words in the location riddle on Trezor's Key. I'm starting here because it's one of the earliest places the community noticed that the cyan words contain 64 characters. 64 is interesting because there are a couple of references throughout the game that point us towards the number 64 and an 8x8 grid. The most notable references come from level 2.3, where base 64 is used as part of a decoding process, and the level itself is a chess game with 64 squares arranged in an 8x8 grid. So rather than treating this as something I discovered, I'm treating it as a reference point the community identified, one we can now test and compare against the other candidates. Before moving on, I want to point out 4 things I noticed while exploring the location riddle: interaction, visual hierarchy, the color definitions, and the rotating star. The first thing I noticed was the interaction. This isn't just a static block of text. Both the location riddle and the rock riddle react when you hover over them, gently growing in size. The location riddle goes a step further. Even before you hover over the words, the mouse cursor changes from an arrow to a hand, even though nothing there is actually clickable. Even the individual words respond. Regular words grow slightly, shift upwards, and change to yellow. The cyan words behave a little differently. They grow a little more, change from cyan to purple, and their animated glow pauses while they're hovered. Whether those interactions are clues or simply visual design, they clearly show that this section was designed to be explored, not just read. The second thing I noticed was the visual hierarchy. There are multiple layers guiding your attention. Some of those layers aren't visible by default, so I've enabled them here to make them easier to see. A cyan border frames the riddle, yellow corner decorations frame the space, and the text itself sits inside another border. Then there's the text. Most of the words are white, only certain words are cyan, and they're given an animated glow that makes them stand apart. Whether intentional or not, the page is constantly directing your attention towards those cyan words. The third thing I noticed was the color definitions. The text color is defined using a hexadecimal color value, while the glow uses RGB values. I don't know whether that difference is meaningful, but it's the kind of thing I like to keep track of. The fourth thing I noticed was the rotating star. It doesn't appear to be an image. It appears to be a Unicode character, colored purple and continuously rotating. On its own, I don't think the star solves anything, but together with the colors, movement, and interaction, it reinforces the idea that this area has been designed very deliberately. None of these observations prove how the grid should be solved, but together, they suggest the cyan grid isn't the only thing worth paying attention to. The surrounding design may be just as intentional as the grid itself. Before we leave the location riddle, there's one more piece of evidence that's important to include. TQBB member Mark from San Diego identified the phrase make word map. Later, during a recorded community voice chat, Mark asked Chad whether that phrase was correct. Chad's response was simple: make word map correct. And that makes make word map one of the few things we can confidently say has been verified. What it means is another question entirely. It could be an instruction, or it could be something that only makes sense after we compare the other candidate grids. For now, I'm treating make word map as confirmed evidence. But what it's asking us to do is still an open question. The location riddle gives us a clean place to begin, but that's where the investigation starts getting more complicated. Not every candidate fits together this cleanly. The next one raises a completely different question. If this first grid gives us a baseline, what do we do when the next one doesn't? That's where we'll begin our next investigation. Press start and the 1978 problem.